Warning, warning, this podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
If you aim to give us a shot, we'll riddle you. What are we? We're Batman the Enemy Within. That's not the actual answer, but...
No, I was about to say, I appreciate the riddle, but that's not how the riddle works at all.
No.
Yeah, okay. Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris, apparently here with the Riddler. Just not a very good version of the Riddler based on that opening riddle.
Yeah, everyone knows the actual answer to the riddle is helicopter. I'm Ev.
Yes, this is Ev. So, we're continuing our discussion after our last episode on Batman, the Telltale series, with the follow-up, Season 2. Although this kind of stands on its own, it's like a bit of a standalone title as well. Batman, the Enemy Within. So, moving into initial impressions, after some of your more disparaging comments on Season 1 last episode, what generally did you think of the Enemy Within?
I think this is a stark improvement of the first season. They apparently listened to what I had to say last episode.
Yep, even though they made this before you said it, it's somehow retroactively time travel. Don't think about it, sure.
But yeah, I felt the choices mattered more and the story branched in interesting ways, and I was really enthralled with the characters. And like we mentioned last episode, the way they twisted the Batman mythos to keep you sort of in suspense and surprised was very well done. So, yes, if last season was a C+, then this is definitely a B+.
Cool. Okay. Moved up a whole grade.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I really enjoy this as well. To be honest, I don't know if I feel as strongly about some of the choices made in this season compared to the first one, but I'm not sure if that's just kind of the quality of diminishing returns with just the storytelling, or if that's just, some other details. There's a few kind of plot details and things that I have taken issue with in this season, but ultimately I think it's really great as well. I think a lot of the really core stuff, especially the Batman Joker stuff, is really fresh and really innovative and really fun, and it ultimately leads to a really satisfying conclusion. So yeah, I think it's really solid, and definitely one of the better Telltale, especially the two seasons together, is definitely one of the better Telltale series. Yeah, so if we want to start talking about some of the general plot details at the very least, obviously the most significant relationship or the narrative core of this season is the relationship between John Doe and Batman. Did you coming into this at the very least? Obviously, John Doe had been introduced in season 1, but did you have any sort of preconceived expectations about where they might go with Joker regarding season 2? Because expectations have a ton to do with the way that this relationship plays out in this season.
Yeah, I did have many expectations, especially. It was pretty damn obvious that he was going to be the Joker by the end of it.
Everyone knew he was going to be the Joker, but...
And my expectation was it was sort of going to be very much almost kind of like the Red Hood sort of origin, where it's Batman indirectly causing the Joker to go into the chemicals and go full mad and stuff.
Sure.
And that's where I was expecting. I did quite like how my expectations were subverted through things like the Joker being more of a vigilante, having a lot of his gadgets come from Batman in a sense, and make that parallel a lot more distinct and clear. And how even by the end, you don't have a full villain Joker necessarily, depending on your choices. You could end up with one that actually still kind of is friends with Bruce Wayne. At least that's how I played it.
Yeah, no, sure. Well, I mean, as we were sort of talking about last episode, the choices you make in some respects can not drastically alter the way the narrative plays out, but it can really affect the relationships in some ways. And I think the way they did Batman and Joker in this game is hands down like the strongest part of it in many respects.
Oh, absolutely.
Like Joker's a character that is really popular for a reason. Like he's always been incredibly compelling and entertaining, and he's shown up in so many different forms of media. Everyone has their favorite version of the Joker, whether it be like Heath Ledger or Jack Nicholson or Mark Hamill and so on. But what they did with this Joker, which I thought was really impressive, was not only distinguish it from almost any other rendition of the Joker ever, but really put the relationship between Batman and the Joker front and center in a way that some of like Batman/Joker stories haven't even done before in this extent. So I think, like, obviously people have always talked about the idea of like Joker is ultimately in love with Batman. Like he's kind of infatuated with that idea. And in this, that's kind of made manifest in the way that no other version of Joker has done before. And I even have to admit, going into this season, like, obviously we talked about regarding season 1 that so much of it was built around anticipating what fans would expect when it comes to it. Coming into this, I honestly thought, based on a lot of my choices, that there would be a possibility at the end that he is not inherently the Joker by the end of it. Like, I save his life, and not only save his life, but save like millions of the people that he ends up killing, basically. I found the fact that obviously the level of murderous intent he has at the end is a little bit different, but he ultimately still becomes the Joker in one way or another. And I found the fact that even though it was inevitable in the end, the journey I had getting to there and legitimately believing throughout a good chunk of the season that I could stop him becoming the Joker, I found really compelling. Just narratively, I thought that was really, really fantastic. So, yeah, and that was hands down my biggest takeaway from this season.
I completely 100% agree with you on that, because there was a lot of times where I'm going, yes, I'm going to save him. He's not going to be the Joker. In the same way that I kind of felt with the first one with the Penguin at the very early beginning.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
sure.
Like, I can stop him becoming the Penguin, and then, no, I can't.
No.
So that kind of, with that mentality, I did kind of think, it's still going to probably end up him being the Joker. But the way that feels, the part of me that's like really invests in Batman, because it's like, I can fix this. I can fix everything, which, I mean, you can't in a Batman anything, basically. A Batman franchise, everything has to still be pretty terrible by the end, just slightly better.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, if everything ends up being decent, like, Batman doesn't exist in that way. And I think one of the, like, what I love about this Joker as well is that it kind of ties into this one thing that Batman has always desperately been trying to solve, which is this solution of how do you stop the Joker without killing him? And this is basically, it poses a solution to that by being, you stop him becoming the Joker in the first place. And because you know implicitly where, if he becomes the Joker, where that's going to end up, it's kind of in a way attempting to, even if the character Batman in the game isn't aware of it, because the player is conscious and the player is conscious of making those decisions, he's implicitly trying to solve Batman's ultimate conundrum, even if he isn't conscious of it. And I think that's really great. I think the way they almost play Joker in this game is a kind of a form of like almost metamodernism in some ways. Have we talked about metamodernism on this podcast before?
I don't think we have, so please explain.
Okay, so basically there's this idea, if people are familiar with the term postmodernism, which is considered like a movement in literary like circles and whatever else in film and such, which is normally centered around basically a self-awareness and almost a cynical critique of the tropes that the audience is familiar with. So it's basically going into a film and a film is saying, we know that you're going to anticipate this and we're just basically mocking it and making fun of it and things like that. Like Deadpool's a really fantastic example of a postmodern character. But metamodern is kind of like another level beyond postmodernism, and some people have even referred to it as postmodernism, in that it's we know that you know that we know, but because we know that you know that we know, we're going to do the thing that you think we're not going to do because you know that we know. So it's basically, it's kind of even like indulging in the tropes and leaning into them while still being incredibly conscious of the fact that they are tropes. And I think the way that they did Joker in this game, unlike, say, Vicky Vale in Season 1, which is basically then subverting expectations, is leaning into the expectations even while being conscious of those expectations. And I think it really succeeds. I think it's a really great approach, especially for Batman fans like us who are obviously super familiar with Batman and the Joker and where this character is going to end up. It just made for a really, really fantastic journey.
Yeah, completely agree. And on a very less academic note,
sure,
I do have to applaud the performances of some of the voice actors, especially Anthony Ingruber. I think I'm pronouncing that
I
right.
think so. Sure.
Yes, but he was the Joker in this, and he was, again, I didn't feel he was leaning into any particular frame of reference. He was trying to bring something of his own, which is interesting because you already have a former Joker voice on the voice cast in Troy Baker.
Funnily enough, yeah.
So you already are linking comparisons with that, and then you have, of course, every comparison you can make with Joker with every other performance, like you mentioned, Jack Nicholson, Heath Ledger, Mark Hamill. You're always going to have that. So I think it brought enough of difference to make it distinct, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
And leans into that sort of meta modernism you were talking about.
No, absolutely. I think you make a really great point regarding the Joker in some respects, because even if we were to talk about the one time that Troy Baker has played the Joker before in Batman Arkham Origins, he is basically doing a version of Mark Hamill's Joker. Like, it's so incredibly similar to it, and I think if you brought in a voice actor, whether that be Troy Baker, I mean, it would have been really funny if he ended up voicing both Bruce Wayne and Joker. I would have liked it purely from like a thematic perspective, but I think he probably would have just come in and done basically that same voice again and tried to ape Mark Hamill, and I really don't think it would have succeeded because it just doesn't have the same level of distinctness that this voice actor has.
Yeah.
So yeah, once again, I think you make a really great point that this is a really distinct version of the Joker. So before we go into... Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, we do eventually get Troy Baker being both Batman and Joker, but that comes in a later movie that came out more recently.
Which one was that again?
Isn't it Batman and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. I saw that recently. Yeah, no, fair enough. Yep.
So we did get that lovely symmetry.
Sure.
Eventually.
Well, yeah, in a very silly movie. Silly but fun. I wouldn't be opposed to recommending Batman versus TMNT. But I think it's really, really good and a really strong point. Before we move into like some of the more sources and detailed analysis of like some of the choices, how exactly did you feel regarding this season's handling of Amanda Waller and the larger pact of villains? Because they really lent into a lot of the Batman characters a lot more in this season compared to season 1.
Yes. So you have, of course, in the story, the agency, which is basically just Argus.
Yeah. I'm not sure why they changed the name.
Neither.
That was a weird choice.
Even when she first came in and I saw the big A, I thought, oh, they're doing Argus, and then well, I'm part of the agency. Okay.
Sure. Why not?
And
it's
also...
an hotel, I guess.
Yeah. And also the Pact, which is just the Gotham...
Yeah. Once again, a weird
crew.
name.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't understand that choice of name too, but I do think the choice of villains that they had in there and all that made things quite interesting.
Yes.
So,
It's not a group that I've previously seen before. I think that's mainly because for once we had Harley Quinn before we had the Joker.
Yeah, that's true.
Which
We'll definitely have to talk about Harley Quinn at some point.
Yes.
Yeah.
But aside from that, when looking at the Pact, I thought up until his death, I thought the Riddler was quite well done because he usually is pretty sucky.
Yeah.
In other things aside from the comics.
Depends on the version, sure.
Yes.
Yep.
But in video games, at least, he sort of had the potential, but never sort of fully achieved it. And I think in this, it got closer than a lot of the other games did.
No, fair enough. Yep. He feels legitimately sinister in this, which isn't always the
Yes.
case for Riddler. So
Yeah.
Yep.
As it comes to some of the others, wasn't particularly thrilled by. Like, one of my favorite Gotham villains is always going to be Bane. And my issue has always been that Bane has always, unless he is the star villain, he is never really given the respect that he deserves.
He's a bad
as
supporting character, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I feel, again, he's never good as a supporting character because he ends up just being the heavy, which is like only 30% of what his character is. He is so much more, and when they try to bring that in, it diminishes from the rest of it, and you get this like law of ninjutsu where the more villains you have, the easier it is to take them out.
I haven't heard of that before, but that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, awesome. No, I totally agree regarding Bane in that respect. Bane has had always a really interesting track record, particularly in things outside of the comics, because in the comics he was kind of provided as like almost an anti-Batman, and then he's just as strong and he's just as smart, but he's just coming from an antagonistic perspective. But ever since then, like in a lot of the Arkham games and in this and in Batman and Robin, heaven forbid, he's basically just been used as the muscle. And I think you're right. This one definitely leaned more into that ideology of Bane rather than showing him as like the criminal mastermind that he is in Arkham Origins. I think he's fantastic in Arkham Origins and obviously the original Nightfall. So yeah. That's a really good point. What did you think of Mr. Freeze? Because Mr. Freeze is always a character I've really loved, but I don't know how I felt about him being just such a supporting character, honestly. Yeah.
Again, he's very much a character that requires his own, like, at least subplot.
Yeah, sure. And he
That
has
he
a
can be the
little
focus
bit
on.
of this, but they don't focus on it very much.
Not a whole lot. And
Yeah.
look, part of me thinks you can he could probably have been replaced with one of the other villains.
Anyone. You could have thrown in
Yeah.
Killer Croc there or something.
Yeah,
Or, just,
or
you
even
know.
like Deadshot would have been interesting.
Yeah, Deadshot would have been a good choice, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my thought, especially when they brought in the whole sniper thing. My initial thought with that was, oh, cool, Deadshot.
Deadshot. Nope.
Alas,
We'll get
I
into
was
that.
wrong.
We'll get into that sniper situation eventually as well.
Yes.
Yep.
So yeah, I thought he was just kind of there.
Yep. I was a little bit disappointed with that. I almost wondered, especially compared to the first season, which I thought was really economical and really strong about how it used a smaller cast of characters, but key characters. Every other character seemed significant, and this one felt a little bit overstuffed at times. It just felt like there was characters just in there for the sake of it, and I think Bane and Mr. Freeze are kind of the people who fall along the wayside. I think I've currently forgotten her name, but Lucius Fox's daughter,
Tiffany,
that's right. She almost feels like an afterthought in some respects.
Yeah.
I'm ultimately happy with where they went in the character, but there's times in the season that they almost feel like they forget about her. And then they even introduced the other agency character, Eamon was her name?
yeah,
I don't quite recall.
Irma.
Eamon Avesta.
That's the one.
Yeah, and then Harvey Bullock as well. And
yeah.
just all these other... I feel like they
So
added,
many characters.
I feel like they added too many people to the cast compared to season 1. I almost wonder if Telltale knew this was going to be their last Batman season, because the first season didn't sell incredibly well, and they just kind of did the throw everything at the wall, because we just want to play with all of our toys at once. So, yeah.
Yeah, and given that you mentioned that up, it even ends with the choice that you could just stop being Batman. So I think they did kind of know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this... We talked about this, obviously, regarding Season 1, but one of the great things about this is, since it's an Elseworld tale, you can make bold and drastic decisions that ultimately, like, really affect the Batman mythos. I think killing off Riddler was one of those choices that was really shocking when I was first playing through. And Lucius Fox as well, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
It's a really strong way to start the season, I thought, killing him off in a manner like that I found really, really great narratively, and they ended up paying off in a really great way by the end. So, yeah, and I think the fact that they can make choices like that was great, but I think they might have needed a little bit more restraint compared to Season 1. Season 1 felt like much more contained, especially compared to a lot of the characters. But
And in a more meta note, it probably would have been nice for them to contain it and sort of make it more controlled and less throw everything at it, in the sense that it would have left the developers, time to live their lives and have families and not get screwed over in the end by Telltale.
You mean not get crunched by the horrible machine that is the video game industry?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And, get paid for that overtime.
Yeah. What an incredible thought, right?
Yeah.
Getting paid for overtime. Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on this last episode as well, but yeah, Telltale ended in a bit of a whimper in the end, unfortunately, just by a whole series of mismanagement, basically burning staff out, spending too much money on licenses, flooding the market, not getting enough return. Like, I love Telltale games, and I still haven't gotten around to playing all of their stuff, which really just kind of indicates a lot of the managerial problems that were happening. And I think you make a good point that I wonder if even every now and then those cracks kind of show through in not only this season, but some of the other Telltale games.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Bit of a shame, but yeah. Anyway, that's a lot of industrial stuff. But if it affects the final product, I think it's worth mentioning at the very least. So, did we want to move into like some of the sources or specific characters and things like that? So,
yeah, we can bring up.
Yeah,
Again,
sure.
this is a very, because it's an Elseworld tale and it's very much created by the developers and the story writers for this. There's no explicit story that they've sort of taken.
yeah.
But there are, of course, references and hints, and of course the characters have to come from somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. They kind of draw from like the larger mythos in a lot of ways rather than specific stories and things like that. But there's definitely key details that they took from that I think are definitely worth talking about. So I think one of the interesting ones is that they kind of changed Riddler into almost like a legacy, not necessarily legacy, but almost like an aged villain who's kind of returned back on the scene, which I think is an interesting one. So like Edward Nygma's always been one of these people who kind of existed because of Batman, like one of those characters, obviously, that he's there to test Batman and things like that. But this way, they kind of tie him into the history of Gotham in a way that he hasn't particularly before, but I kind of liked. I don't know. It gave a little bit of a legacy and a history to this version of Gotham City, which I appreciated, even if I thought it was a superfluous detail.
Yeah, my entire thought process was it's interesting that they've brought it up, but it did also kind of feel like a bit of a crutch in the sense that it just made, oh yeah, he's been here this whole time and he's come back and now he's dead.
Yep.
So it was just sort of building a backstory where there wasn't really one there.
Sure.
I kind of feel.
Sure.
But it did ultimately, it was a nice different take on the Riddler, and it did mean he could be that sort of more experienced, that more menacing kind of aspect to it. And we got to at least hear about how he would play with the police and the riddles that he left, even if there wasn't enough time to fully develop.
Yeah, of course. I think it just added a little bit more to a character that in many ways can almost feel like a gimmick villain, basically. Yeah. And I think there's a lot more to Edward Nygma than that, but they don't necessarily go into it in this and in a lot of other versions of the Riddler, frankly. So
they didn't really have enough time to do that as well.
No, exactly. Once again, it felt a little bit overstuffed. So, yeah. I think one of the really strong things they do is that even though it feels a little bit disparate, having Harley Quinn, Mr. Freeze, Bane, all of those basically to come together in the Pact, that even though they all have really distinct backstories and are really distinct characters and have paired up in the comics like all Batman villains have, but it don't really have a lot of history together, but all tie them together through basically wanting this serum, this cure. Because I think it was a really kind of interesting point that they touched on. It almost kind of reminded me of that way in the Martha moment in Batman v Superman,
yes.
where they just think of these deals as like, oh, both their parents are named Martha, we should do something with this. And they almost did it with these characters by finding out, oh yeah, all of them want a cure in some way or another. Yeah, at least for Bane or Mr. Freeze. So for people who aren't familiar with Mr. Freeze, his most famous story comes from an episode of Batman the Animated Series called Heart of Ice, which kind of shows his origin story of Victor Fries being a brilliant scientist whose loving wife basically develops an incurable disease, and he freezes her in order to basically give him more time to find a cure. And I thought that was a really great way of not only tying him in, giving us a logical reason for Mr. Freeze to be there to get this cure while still fitting in the classic backstory that we expect for the character as well. Because, I mean, it's gotten to the point that that wasn't Mr. Freeze's origin originally, but it's so synonymous with the character now that it would have felt weird if he didn't have that backstory and he wasn't trying to cure his wife. So I just thought that was economical storytelling. Similar with Bane, and like he wanted a cure for his venom addiction as well.
Yes,
so.
Because that came from the comics as well. So for those who don't know from Nightfall, he was basically put in prison, this like horrid prison out on an island somewhere off the coast of South America, I think.
Yeah, it's what's the island called? San Paulo,
something like that.
No, I don't quite remember. Yeah. Anyway,
but yes, he was basically put in there for a crime that his father committed, and through their legacy laws or something, they went, yeah, you're his son, so you will pay for the time that he couldn't. So he basically grew up in a prison. He learned from a few mentors about how to sort of fight and keep up, and eventually became the king of the prison. And that's when they started doing tests on this thing called Venom. He was the one person to actually survive, but developed a dependency to the drug, which has been his main weakness through most of the film.
Yeah. Sure.
And the franchise in general.
That's how Batman always beats Bane. Just, take out his Venom supply, essentially. And then it becomes even more pronounced when he is just played as a brute, which I thought he was in this season. He doesn't show an incredible amount of intelligence.
No. Although he was literate, so that was a positive.
He was literate, yeah. He wasn't just talking in grunts, either a certain live-action depiction that we will not discuss. No. But, I much prefer the version of Bane that's found in either Arkham Origins and even, like, The Dark Knight Rises to some respects. So, yeah, that was a bit of a shame. I think one of the people, actually, probably the character outside of the Joker that I appreciated the most in the Pact is their version of Harley Quinn.
Ah, yes.
And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, to how this is such a fresh version of the Joker, in that they completely invert his relationship with her in a way that I thought was kind of great.
Yeah, I was really surprised by it.
Yeah. It's like, it feels really fresh and almost kind of progressive in a funny way. Like, for people who don't know, Harley Quinn is basically, she was introduced in Batman the Animated Series too, as like Joker's number one lackey, who was a psychologist who tried to treat him in Arkham Asylum before ultimately falling in love with him, then becoming Harley Quinn and basically following Joker around. The whole dynamic has essentially been Joker just uses her as a tool. Like, I think one of my favorite lines where Joker said to Harley Quinn is like, oh, you're the loveliest tool in my box. And Harley is completely oblivious to the fact that she's being used and manipulated in this way. But in this context, Harley is shown as the assertive one the Joker has fallen in love with after Arkham Asylum, and he follows her around like a sick puppy, and I think it is great.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it leads into some of the big choices that really do impact the rest of the story as well.
Oh, for sure.
And that scene with the bridge, that was one of the ones where I'm like, yep, I'm down. This is cool.
Yep.
I'm okay with this now.
It's fantastic. Yep. And I even loved the idea of like, I don't recall if they've ever added this into the comics, but how Harley Quinn had like a history of mental illness, and that's what she was trying to cure and things like that. Because not only does that add, I thought, an interesting kind of humanist element to this character that was ultimately fairly abrasive, but it almost feels appropriate to the comic version of Harley Quinn in an interesting way.
Oh, yeah.
I would kind of be okay if that was one of those details that was sort of like made into canon, and that she almost had like a history of mental illness in her family. And so many people just frankly feel sorry for her because she was kind of conditioned to fall for Joker in the first place. I don't know. I just thought that was a really interesting detail.
Well, it is sort of actually part of the comics already, in the sense that, especially now that she's broken free of the Joker in the comics, and she's sort of developed these more healthy relationships. It's her trying to sort of look back at all the problems, not just the ones caused by Joker, but the ones she's always sort of had, and trying to get in the right sort of frame of mind and look for the healthier relationships.
Yeah.
And that's why her like relationship with Poison Ivy has sort of progressed as well, because that's probably the most healthiest, even though it is two supervillains.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Yeah.
A hell of a lot healthier than Batman. Sorry, I almost said Batman and Joker. Joker and Harley Quinn.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry. And no, I just
So
thought...
it is touched. But yeah, I can see them going through that furthermore in the path based off of this.
Absolutely. So yeah, no, I thought this was probably... I mean, it also helps that this version of Harley Quinn outside of the Joker is the most unique version of the two. Like, Bane and Mr. Freeze both draw a lot from their comic counterparts in those ways, but Harley feels really distinct, and I think really adds to the dynamic between Batman and Joker as you're talking about, because, you know, she leads to a lot of the key decisions between them, which I thought was fantastic. So yeah, a really edgy version of the character too. She's almost been played off as like a comedic relief in like Suicide Squad and things like that as well, but this kind of turned her into, I don't necessarily want to say badass, but almost like scarily unhinged.
Yeah.
Like almost intimidating in a lot of ways, which I've never found Harley Quinn like a particularly threatening or intimidating character in the same way one might Joker. But I legitimately, like, she felt like a real like character presence every time she was in a scene, which I thought was great.
Yeah,
So
she was a ringleader and a cult of personality.
Yeah,
and that really shined through.
that's a really good way to describe it, actually. No, I thought that was fantastic. Is there anything else we want to touch on regarding some of the characters? Like, we've kind of mentioned Tiffany Fox briefly.
Yes.
Which kind of, she is almost set up as a successor to Lucius Fox. She is in the comics. She only appeared in like 2014 as a future version of Batgirl. So, I mean, it's basically an original character in everything but name. So, but I thought she was kind of an interesting addition. And I think the way that they go with her character by having her being the one kill Riddler, I thought was pretty bold, which I kind of appreciated. So
Yeah, I certainly wasn't expecting it playing the game.
Yep.
It certainly is affected by the fact that, like you mentioned, she seems to sort of pop in and out a bit.
Yeah, she almost feels like she's forgotten every now and then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess that adds to the surprise factor.
Uh-huh.
In either she surprisingly rocks up or you've drawn her along with her, depending on your choices. And yeah, so I think that helped, but at the same time, I still don't I understand like the motivation, but I don't quite understand everything around it.
Sure. Like,
So
it's pretty bold for her to find out, oh, my father's dead, I'm just going to go out and murder someone now.
Yeah.
From someone who has never done anything like that before. Yeah.
And at the end, where she's like either joining the agency or joining Batman or going off and being a vigilante herself.
Sure.
None of that sort of seemed to, like, I feel, be touched on enough. Like, it was there, but it just didn't feel like enough of part of the main story to warrant it.
That I mean, that choice at the end, I thought it was a really great choice because I felt like it was kind of, even though we didn't have a Robin in this game, it was mirroring that relationship that Batman might have with a mentee, which I appreciated and I thought was great. But I think you're kind of right that it's not seeded through in the same way that some of it could have been better. But I think at the very least they went with an interesting direction with her, and I appreciated that. And I think the ultimate choice to kill Lucius Fox in season 1 episode 1 was a really strong choice as well. So Yeah, no, I thought that was great. Oh, we definitely need to talk about Amanda Waller as well.
Oh, yes.
Actually, considering she and Detective Gordon, or Commissioner Gordon at this point, like are the two main like decision maker. Well, not necessarily decision makers, but the two main relationships that you need to handle throughout the game on top of Joker. So, I like this version of Amanda Waller. I didn't think she was particularly distinct in the same way that like Amanda Waller from like Justice League Unlimited. Or even Suicide Squad Amanda Waller, I thought she had a little bit more of a harder edge to her here. I mean, she's very faithful to the comics version of her in a lot of ways. For people who aren't familiar, Amanda Waller has basically always been this really hardcore government agent who runs this thing called Argus, which is basically just the CIA, every other sinister government organization, who's kind of been a little bit of a not necessarily anti-hero, but she's always been a little bit of an ambiguous character where she supports some heroes, she doesn't like others, and she's always had a bit of an antagonistic relationship with Batman. So,
well, she's the one that basically came up with and runs the Suicide Squad.
Well, yeah, exactly.
So that was never going to be a good relationship move with Batman.
Yeah, sure. That was always going to make her a little bit morally questionable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think she's great from a gameplay perspective because I think she's a really logical character that you would need to balance your relationship with over the course of the series, and I think they do a good job of that. But I didn't think anything about her motivations or her presentation or even the voice acting I thought was particularly exceptional.
Yeah.
It almost kind of... Oh, sorry, what were we going to say?
Oh, no, I'm just agreeing with you in this case. She just sort of felt a little flat, I think.
Sure. She almost kind of reminded me of the version in Arrow, which just frankly feels just a little bit inconsequential, which I don't think is ever a good thing for Amanda Waller. I think Amanda Waller should always be, at least in my favorite renditions of her, be like the most demanding and serious person in whatever room she's in. Yeah. And I just didn't quite feel that in this way. So, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that it's also really overstuffed that she doesn't necessarily get lost, but like there are so many other villains and relationships vying for your attention that, it's just not the same.
It should be easy to hate Amanda Waller. In this case, it didn't.
No.
It felt like she was just there.
Yeah, just there. Yeah, it made sense from a narrative perspective, but just the character itself was once again kind of lost in the shuffle, I thought. So, yeah. I mean, ultimately, even despite some of our misgivings regarding the characters and how it kind of feels a little bit overstuffed at times, the ultimate core of like the main narrative going through a Batman and Joker's relationship, I think is still really strong.
Yes.
And hands down, like, it just maintains a really fantastic through line throughout the entire series. So, yeah, really great. Is there anything else you want to talk about regarding sources or characters or details before we move into Do It Differently?
No, I think we've covered everything.
Cool. Yeah, very good.
Jingle, jingle, jingle.
Jingle. All right. Do you want to go first?
Sure, because it's going to be very quick.
Okay.
Because I kind of covered everything that I sort of wanted in the first one in terms of gameplay. The last episode, go back and listen to it if you haven't. But yeah, so gameplay-wise, I think I'd still sort of keep the same idea. So my changes would only really be storyline-wise.
Sure.
And in that particular case, it is very much how we described. Cut out a lot of the ancillary characters and aspects and really just focus on the Batman-Joker relationship. Have Harley in there because she was good. Take out Bane. Leave him for a potential sequel if need be.
Sure.
Even though that clearly did not happen and is never going to happen.
No, sadly not.
No. And Victor Freeze, leave him out of it. If you need another heavy, I'd say bring in Solomon Grundy.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, he's always the one that I feel should be the heavy whenever they misuse Bane.
Because he's incredibly stupid as well, so he basically fits that archetype too. Either him or Killer Croc, but I do think Killer Croc does have some humanist elements that they probably would,
Actually, now that you mention it, if they're still sticking with sort of the idea of looking for a cure for Harley Quinn, that would work as well.
That would make sense for Killer Croc. That's a really good point, yeah.
I'd have, Killer Croc and Harley Quinn be the main bad guys, have the relationship still be Batman and Joker, and follow that all the way through. I'd say give them an ending where you actually can save the Joker, and then maybe like a little twist at the end where it's like, oh, now someone else is going to end up being the Joker.
Yeah, sure.
Or
pulling Gotham.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, since you remind me of that, I completely changed my mind. Screw that. Get rid of it all. Just burn it.
Burn it all to the ground.
No, but yeah, so very cut it back down. I'd even say lose Amanda Waller.
Oh, okay.
I reckon you could probably bring in Bullock as that sort of sort of counter to Gordon,
Okay, sure.
but keep everything within Gotham and just like, how are we going to have a Gotham that completely follows the Batman, or are we going to have a Gotham that ends up decrying him as a vigilante with Bullock,
Sure.
kind of thing?
Okay.
So that's where I'd sort of leave it to, as the subplot to the main Batman Joker through line.
Okay. Fair enough. Interesting.
And
Yeah.
I'd also not kill the Riddler because I like the Riddler.
Yeah.
I'd leave it to someone else to die.
Yeah, I've wondered about that as well, if it's worth replacing that character at the beginning with someone who feels not necessarily more expendable, but like someone who you can lose in the first episode and is not such a loss. So, yeah, I didn't quite decide on anyone. But no, I like that version of it at the very least. I would do something similar in that I would like to streamline a lot of it as well. I probably would want to get rid of the agency. I think it's a great choice you made there, like having Bullock being the other kind of antagonistic one, almost like a rogue cop in relationship to Gordon, I thought would be nice. But the one major change I wanted to make was kind of take it away from like Lotus and a lot of the secret government facilities and all that going on there, because I always found that a little bit generic, and replace it with the Court of Owls. So
Nice.
one of the other things that I didn't necessarily touch on the episode was that this feels a little bit too disconnected from season 1 in a lot of ways. Like Catwoman, we didn't even talk about Catwoman.
Oh, yeah.
But that relationship continues on through.
Yeah.
And there's obviously through lines and such, but it still feels like a distinct own story. And I thought what would have been really fantastic to add to some level of the moral ambiguity and some of the stuff that was set up in season 1 was basically reveal that Thomas Wayne was a member of the Court of Owls. Because not only does that make sense based on the twist in season 1, but it's also a really fantastic way to tie it into the search for the cure in season 2. Because for people who aren't familiar, the Court of Owls basically has this kind of magic serum, essentially, that makes immortal soldiers.
Yep.
And which is like the perfect analogy that you can have for, basically something for these villains to pursue to, cure themselves. So I thought it would have been really great to kind of bring them in as an additional antagonistic force. You could probably have one of the Talons, like one of the fronts of the Court of Owls at the very least. But for the most part, I would mostly want them to be almost like an end goal, that the villains are pursuing them while Batman is trying to take them down at the same time. Yeah. Almost like three factions in one, essentially. And I just thought that would have been a really fun way of streamlining it, connecting it a little bit more to season 1, as well as just, I would love to see what Telltale's version of the Court of Owls would be in this universe. Because I really think, obviously they're a newer edition, but I love the Court of Owls in regards to the Batman mythos. And I think so far they've been underserved in other mediums. So I think that'd be a really great way to do it. Yep.
I really like that idea, and I'm really now disappointed in mine. That is such a good story, especially, highly recommend go read Court of Owls.
Yes, yep. Start of Batman New 52, the first 3 volumes, I think it was, or something like that. Court of Owls, City of Owls, and I don't remember the last one. But either way.
You can find them in a collected issue.
Yeah, sure.
Should be fine.
Yep.
Some come with a free mask.
Which I do have. I love the Court of Owls. And I'm looking forward to maybe 10, 20 years down the line where they're just like a staple of the Batman mythos that you can draw from. I mean, Gotham kind of did it in a similar way. I didn't actually hate what they did with the Court of Owls in Gotham, but that's another thing. Anyway, I just thought that was a much nicer way to go about it. And I just love the Court of Owls. So, great. All right, I think that covers us for this episode on Telltale Season 2, Batman the Enemy Within. Probably not going to be the last Telltale season we'll do. I don't know, we'll just wait and see. I mean, I'm obviously a huge fan of them, but some other people have more questionable opinions on them at the very least.
You mean the one other person in this podcast?
Yeah, who else would I be referring to? Yeah. Anyway, but no, I do tend to find video games at least very entertaining to talk about, and I do think this is a really great and interesting rendition of Batman, which I'm always a fan of. So, all right, what have you got to recommend for us this episode then?
So this episode, I am basically going to recommend another game. Mainly just because it's all I've been playing.
Okay.
Recently, aside from the Telltale games which I've had to play for this podcast. You had to drag me away from my Switch.
He said as he just gave me this dead stare from across the table. God, now I feel bad.
But I'm still very much in love with the Pokemon series.
Oh, okay.
And I have recently gotten into Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu.
Oh, nice.
Because it's a nice little throwback for nostalgia reasons. It is stripped back everything.
Sure.
It has some questionable choices about catching mechanics, but it's enough to keep it alive.
I'm not overly fond of those.
No, but aside from that, there's some great stuff in it. I've got a Pikachu that I can customize.
Mm-hmm.
He's in a vest and a bowler hat and some black rim glasses.
Oh, that's so cute.
Absolutely. And I get to ride on a Dragonite.
Wait, really? Can you ride Dragonites in that game?
Yes.
How?
Yes, you can.
As in, like, any flying Pokemon or just Dragonites?
Dragonites, Charizards, any of the legendary birds.
Oh, that's so cool.
I think are the ones you can fly. Oh, and Aerodactyls.
Yep, sure. They're probably removing that for Sword and Shield, because of course they are.
Well, it's a post-game thing, so...
Oh, yeah, sure.
But you can also ride a lot of the other land. So before then, I was just riding my Arcanine everywhere.
Oh, nice. Yep.
Yes, because that's basically the bikes now.
That's super amazing.
So yes, if you can get it discounted and you're a fan of the Pokemon series, I highly recommend picking it up just for nostalgia's sake.
Sure.
Because it is just the 151 again. Mm-hmm. Which did mean I had to relearn what did and didn't evolve. But
Trip down memory lane in the worst kind. All the technical details that you forget across the years.
Yes, and it means you can... And it's also a game that they mentioned, and it's in the title, you can hook it up with Pokemon Go. So if you're still one of the few people playing that...
One of the few million people still playing
there's
that.
still quite a number of them.
Yeah, there's a lot around. I mean, it started massive, but it was always going to maintain a solid player base.
Yes.
At the very least, yeah.
I've jumped back into it thanks to this game.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's really nice, and jump on it.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, that one looked kind of cute, but part of me was really keen on just waiting for the next generation of Pokemon games.
Yes, that is also a good thing.
Granted, all the controversy going around Sword and Shield right now is making me question that decision, but wait and see how the game comes out. I assume you heard about that, or...
Yes, I have.
There's a whole controversy in the Pokemon community right now, which we don't need to get into, but...
Especially because by the time this comes out, it's probably long gone.
Yeah, true,
Sword
actually.
and Shield will be out.
Yeah, I mean, people will still be mad about it if they don't reverse the decision, but yeah, that's fair. Cool. No, for me, I am going to recommend... This is a bit of a weird one for me, because I don't explicitly remember what it's called, but recently I've been getting a bunch of volumes of what is called Batman Legends of the Dark Knight, which is kind of like an anthology comic that I started, I think, releasing in 2012 onwards. So it's a few years old now at this point, where it's just every single issue basically has a different artist and a different writer, and they just tell a self-contained Batman story irrespective of continuity, which has been really fun. I've been really enjoying a lot of those, but I want to call out one specifically that I believe is in Volume 2, so Batman Legends of the Dark Knight Volume 2, that has a short comic in which Batman finds out that a bunch of citizens of Gotham have been sending letters addressed to him to the GCPD. And he just got, like, Gordon mentions it offhand, and he takes it back to the Batcave and starts reading through and starts reminiscing on all these cases and about all these people that have been really thankful for all the things he's done across the years. And it's kind of like a really sweet, surprisingly sweet, like, version of a Batman story that almost had me, like, emotionally invested by the end of it, which I thought was really nice. It's kind of a combination of, like, imagine how Santa Claus feels like reading letters, but, like, obviously dressed in a bat cowl and real grizzled in a cave and things like that. But it's just, I found it so emotionally resonant because initially Batman just passes it off as, like, you know, something inconsequential, but he starts reading them and then starts realizing the significance of these letters, because it's putting names and stories to all of the things he's done across the years in a way that humanizes people and humanizes the victims and the people he saved in a way that Batman stories don't often do. Normally it's just, you know, like faceless civilians, like the citizens of Gotham that Batman needs to save. And each of these letters makes it almost like a personal story that you directly engage with. And I think it was just a really beautiful idea for a story that was executed really well, that has stuck with me surprisingly well. So...
Sounds really sweet. Something I'll probably have to pick up at some point.
Yeah, well, you can borrow it off me if you want to. So
cool.
I've got the first 5 volumes at this point, so it's really great. Yeah, really been enjoying those. Well, thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. We can be found at all the usual places. Feel free to review us on iTunes. Feel free to send us emails at mediumshift@gmail.com. Next episode, we're actually going to be starting another marathon, another collection of episodes, which is going to be really fun. This time, starting with the film that sunk X-Men The Last Stand. It's a bit of a deep cut, but...
Yeah, bit of a deep cut. We're doing Superman Returns.
Superman Returns, yep. Directed by Bryan Singer, who he left X-Men 3 to basically make this movie, which surprisingly tanked both films, but that's another thing we'll get into next time. And that episode is going to be the start of what we are calling Routhathon.
For Brandon Routh,
because we just like to hit all of the really nerdy pop culture icons, basically. We started with Chris Evans, we're moving to Brandon Routh. who knows how many others we're going to be doing in the future. So yeah, Superman Returns is going to be the first one of that. Feel free to stick around for that episode to find out what other ones we're going to be doing later down the line, including one episode that I know Ev is incredibly excited about. So it's going to make for a very interesting episode, I'm sure. So until next time, fare thee well.
Bullets. The answer to the riddle was bullets.